Oh, look at all the early people. My goodness, you guys are on top of your game. I am trying to get my co-host organized and having some issues, which is why I had to start it early. There we go. Jake, you're a panelist. Let me know if you have the ability to see questions and do all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I can see the Q&A and it looks like I can share my screen.
Okay, we're just going to have to go with that then. I'm not sure why you weren't panelists to begin with,
No.
but
Okay. I'm gonna share.
everybody can see us make the sausage for the 5 minutes before the webinar while we try to get everything queued up.
Everything's queued up.
All right. Hi, Lisa. Good to see you too. Hello, welcome everybody. We had some technical issues, so we had to start the webinar early, but we're or start start the Zoom portion of it early. We're gonna wait here for folks who are not early birds, like all of you. We're so timely. I'm so impressed at everybody who had the link ready to go and was waiting. Welcome everyone. We're giving folks some time to click the link, get oriented, get here. Hello, Jackie in Cincinnati. Amanda in Buffalo. Oh, now I feel like I've backed myself into the corner where I have to do the romper room thing. where I say hi to everyone. Ooh, lots of geographic diversity today. We've got all over the country. I hope everybody's having good weather, not too cold. It's the natural conclusion, Allison. If you've ever seen or heard of romper room, it does feel rather romper roomish. Sunny and 70s in Tennessee. Nice. 62 in Nebraska. We're getting beat out by Nebraska here in Pittsburgh. It's only 57 where I am. It is, however, sunny, and sunny in Pittsburgh is considered to be a potential sign of the apocalypse. So just a warning, everybody. It's never sunny here. BC, welcome, welcome. All right, we'll give everyone a few more minutes. When it's in person, I'm an early bird. I like to be 10 minutes early to make sure that I know where I'm going. But somehow, when it's an online Zoom meeting, I'm always looking for my link at the last minute and scrambling. So, for my spirit animals out there, we'll give us a few more minutes. Little Rock, overcast and 50s. That sounds like us here most days. Welcome, everybody. Halfway through the week. Great. As you come in, as you can see, folks are dropping their name and where they're from in the chat. We love to see it. Let everybody know who you are, where you're from. And we will go ahead and get started here. Jake, do you want to move us on to the first slide? Okay. Oh, I just have to note Ivy from Ghana. That's got to be our farthest away. Welcome. Welcome, Ivy. That's pretty exciting. All right. You don't want to see me do the romper room, so I will keep on going. Great. So drop your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat. The chat scrolls by really fast and it's hard for us to catch them. So if you have a question that you want us to answer at the end of the presentation, put it in the Q&A. We are recording this, so you should have probably got that notification when you popped in. If you're uncomfortable with that, you can leave, but it also means that there will be a presentation that will be available and emailed to everyone in the next few days. And then we will provide you with links at the end of the webinar. Jake will drop those links into the chat for everyone. So our topic today is talking about, investing. What's the unique pitch for food recovery? And this is, those of you who were at the conference, the Food Rescue Conference in October and saw my presentation then, or were at the last webinar, know that there's something I've been talking a lot about, because the more I talk to external people, the more I realize that people don't fully understand what food recovery is. And I think in the food recovery industry, we don't realize that. And so I've seen a lot of people make a pitch to funders that doesn't take into account that funding food recovery is really different than funding a lot of other programs. And so we're going to talk a little bit today about kind of how to frame that pitch for funders so that they get the difference, so that they're really engaged and enrolled in the impact that food recovery is making. But we're going to start by asking, what's the cost of not engaging in food recovery? Set the stage for your funders and kind of talk about what happens if we don't rescue food. Jake? So as we know that we all talk about this a lot, but not everybody knows this. Food in a landfill, one of the major emitters of greenhouse gases. If it were a country, it would be the third largest emitter in the world, behind only China and the United States. And there's a ton of statistics out there that you can get on what exactly the impact is. And something that I read recently that I thought was really interesting is that, and I've been doing this work for a long time, as have a lot of you, and I did not know this. So it's always fun to learn new things, but methane molecules are larger than CO2 molecules, right? So they actually hold more heat. They trap more heat. And food waste, of course, is it has a quick turnaround from disposal to turning it into methane. So it's a sort of a fast acting climate pollutant, which means that taking it out of the landfill, no longer wasting it, has a really, really fast impact on actually reducing the impact of climate change. I think I said impact 20 times in that sentence. If you're writing a paragraph for a funder, don't do that. All right, next. All right, I have to footnote here that Karen, who makes all of our slides so beautiful, is out sick, and I had to add a couple slides on my own. She is going to cringe when she sees them. So I apologize in advance for a few terrible slides, this being one of them. So the food in the landfill has a big climate impact. We know that, right? What we're starting to realize is that the process of manufacturing food and transporting it, growing it, storing it, selling it also has a climate impact, right? And that actually is a major part of how we need to calculate the sort of the value, the climate value of the food that we are throwing away. So if we think about like coal-fired power plants, that is the kind of quintessential sort of climate ick, right? It's terrible, terrible for the environment. Jake, can you click the button? This is animated, and I didn't tell you that in advance. So the food, click it again, clip it a couple times. More, more, more. Keep going until you have a full-on block there. Look at that. Oh, stop. There we go. The climate impact of the food that we throw away, just the growing, processing, transporting, storing, et cetera, is equivalent to 60 coal-fired power plants per year. 60. That's an incredible amount of impact. And when we throw that food away, it needs to be regrown, reprocessed, retransported, restored, and resold to feed people. So when you're talking about the climate impact of food, you need to include that into that. You need to talk about that in your in assessing what it means to rescue food. Next. And all of that impact, that climate change impact that food being wasted has, is costing us a lot of money. So in 2022, the cost of climate change was $165 billion just in the United States. That's not worldwide. That's just in the United States. And that has been soaring. It's been growing disproportionately. And that sort of upward arc is going to continue if we don't do something about it. Next slide. It is estimated that by 2070, the cost to the world's economy for climate impact will be $178 trillion. That's $178 trillion we are spending on the negative effects of climate change, such as disasters, crop failures, et cetera, that we could be spending investing in infrastructure, investing in people, investing in jobs, investing in education. Next. So that's the big picture, right? That's the global impact of not rescuing food, of not keeping it out of the waste stream, of having to regrow food. It's costing us billions of dollars in climate impact. But you can also find a local assessment. There's a lot of information out there about how climate change is impacting different localities. Of course, there are some places where the impact is much more severe than others. California, Texas, and Florida, of course, with their huge coastlines, are experiencing some of the most severe consequences of climate change, but nowhere is immune. And while this map makes it look like Idaho, for example, isn't experiencing a huge impact. If you look at other factors like flooding along rivers and crop failures and the consequences of crop failures driven by climate change, no state, nowhere in the United States is immune. And so, especially if you're writing a grant for a local funder, digging down in and finding what the local consequences of not addressing food waste vis-a-vis climate change are going to be is going to provide you with a lot of really meaningful data for those readers. Next. And of course, bringing it back out to sort of the global stage, all of this is why the UN has included in its sustainable development goals things like, actually, can you click, Jake, to the next slide? Has included reducing food waste. It's so important to our health as a planet that it is one of the major goals, sustainable development goals of the UN. Next. This is another slide I made. I don't think I need to tell you that. And then, of course, there are local initiatives, right? California is the most obvious. Everybody knows about California's SB 1383 by now. They have led the country in passing legislation that targets food waste. New York also has similar legislation, but many state governments are actually focusing on reducing food waste to impact climate outcomes. Pennsylvania, for example, is starting an initiative. Maryland, I know, has an initiative. So take a look and see what's happening at your state level. A lot of this hasn't been made super public yet because it's just starting to filter out, but take a look at that so that funders understand that this is a priority that is being put forward by not just the United Nations, but also by your state governments. Then we switch over to costs of food insecurity. And again, starting at the big picture and the sort of like the general impact of food insecurity. Food insecurity, we know, increases poor health outcomes for adults. Depending on the level of severity of food insecurity that adults face, their likelihood of having diabetes and heart disease and other health other other health conditions that are impacted by poor nutrition and food insecurity go way up. Next slide. And of course, that also is extremely expensive. Socially, that is costing us billions of dollars. Last year, the estimated cost of food insecurity was $148 billion in the United States. And a lot of those costs are borne by the taxpayers, are borne by the government. They come in the form of socialized health costs, Medicaid, Medicare, et cetera. And then on top of that, you have things like productivity losses. People who are in poor health are just not able to work at the same level of productivity that people are healthy. A lot of them are coming out of the workforce earlier, and that has a huge social impact. Of course, in childhood, kids who aren't getting enough to eat or are facing food insecurity aren't doing as well at school and face lifelong, repercussions for that. Right, next. So that's the general. Look local. Guaranteed there are going to be local studies that are showing how food insecurity is impacting your local community's health. If you're writing a grant for a local funder, you want to take a look at that local, at that hyper local area. So this is just an example from Philadelphia. You go from a fairly affluent neighborhood and you go, just a few miles away, and the life expectancy drops by around 20 years, which is incredible. And again, what happens when somebody dies young? That's lost productivity, that's lost contributions to the society. It is more costs borne by the family that are then often transferred over to to the state, to tax funded programs, as well as just the social impact. Next. And this is by county, the healthcare cost by county associated with food insecurity. So again, you might have a county that is spending a lot of money on addressing health outcomes that are coming from the social determinants of health or from food insecurity. Next. And individuals too as well. Individual families and individual people face higher healthcare costs. If they're privately insured, their out-of-pocket costs are still much higher than people who are not food insecure, which is really a 1-2 punch because you just don't have the money. Obviously, if you're food insecure, it's because you don't have the income to be able to, secure your food, right? You don't have the money to spend on healthcare either, but there it is. You have to. So again, we agree climate change and food insecurity are costly. But why does funding food rescue specifically give funders a higher ROI than other approaches? That's the first question we want to ask. And the second is, how can we get funders to think of funding, of grant fundings to food recovery organizations as investment? And so how do we put this all together to make food recovery a attractive investment for those grant funders, for those corporate funders, for those individual donors? Go ahead. So I think we need to start by talking about food recovery and money given to food recovery organizations as an investment, right? There's a return on your investment. That's what we talk about when we talk about private funding of corporate and for-profit ventures, right? If you're in California, I'm sure there are venture capitalists everywhere. I picture them just sitting around like bowls of candy or something. And a venture capitalist, somebody that's investing, is going to put money into a company and expect that that company is going to sell something or do something that's going to make money, and then they're going to get money back, right? And so that return on investment is the ratio between their net return and the cost of their investment. Next slide. When we're talking about investing in food recovery, we're kind of flipping that. And we're saying it's the social cost, right? It's the social cost of food recovery as the nominator, and then the denominator is what it costs to fund food recovery. Next. And so there's going to be that net impact, right? That makes that a good investment. But there's even more reasons why food recovery is a smart place for funders to put their money, whether we're talking about corporations, whether we're talking about foundations, or whether we're talking about individuals. And that is because their return on investment from those social costs is going to come from two places. It's a multinodal approach, right? You are getting a return on that investment in both food security and climate change, right? And even if you're pitching to a climate change funder or a food insecurity funder, you need to be talking about that fact, right? They're getting a double bang for their buck. Why would you not give money to a food recovery organization? It's like giving to two organizations instead of giving it to one that's just focused on, on hunger, and one that's focused on climate change. You get both in one package. Next. Second of all, when within the nodes of hunger fighting, food recovery actually addresses multiple barriers, right? So there's even more benefit, there's more return on your investment, there's more impact in food recovery than there are with other hunger solutions. So when you think about what the barriers are to food security, for example, you've got, money's the obvious one, right? But there's also time and transportation. There's an people living in food deserts. There's almost always a correlation between areas of high food insecurity, low transit access, and low food access, right? And then there's other things like cooking equipment and preparation knowledge. Next. With food recovery, because 80 to 90% of the food that we recover is fresh food. And that statistic comes from the Food Rescue Hero Network. I don't think our network is all that different from most organizations or most networks of food recovery organizations that are focusing specifically on food recovery, because that's what needs to be rescued. That's what's going to go bad quickly. That's what can't just be warehoused and dealt with in the traditional hub and spoke model that we've relied on for so many years. So because you have that high volume of fresh food, right? You have to find places to distribute it, and the existing charitable food network, the existing charitable food system can't absorb it. I was actually just on a call a couple days ago with some students who were interested in starting a food recovery in their area. And they were talking to the food pantries, and the pantries were saying, like, they can't take it. There's not enough places to take this food. They don't have enough open hours to adequately distribute the amount of fresh food that comes from food recovery, which means that food recovery requires finding increased or new distribution points, right? And I know you're all doing this because I talked to you all at different conferences, at ReFed and at Waste Expo and at webinars and whatnot. I know you're all coming up with super creative solutions to get all of that fresh foods into the hands of people that need it, right? So, in our Pittsburgh partner, 412 Food Rescue, started working with housing authorities. That was one of the first places we went to when we were looking for new distribution points, because there's always lots of people there and they need food. So it was a quick, easy way to get food to people quick and easy. But Head Start daycare programs, disability services, veterans programs, LGBTQ plus organizations, right? All of those are places that people who are food insecure are already going, right? And are easy ways to increase your distribution network. What that means, though, is that you're also increasing access by decreasing barriers. If you're taking food directly to a housing authority site or to a daycare center, the people that are accessing that food no longer have to worry about time and transportation to get that food. That's where they're already going, right? So your impact from that is magnified. And we did a study in Pittsburgh. And again, a lot of my data comes from there because that's, of course, where we started. But I know that other organizations are doing similar work and having similar impact. So I strongly suggest you think about doing something like this in your area so you can show the impact you're having to funders. But if you look at the areas of high need in Pittsburgh and you look at the existing charitable food distribution networks that existed before food recovery was expanded, and then you looked at those new sites that were added, again, just purely because we needed somewhere to take food, you realize that there's 100,000 more people within a 15-minute walk shed of food than there were previously. And we're able to identify places that don't have that and get food in there. Next. Actually, go back one more. Let me just sum that up. So again, just to tie that up with a bow, that investment in food recovery is not just addressing food insecurity, but also food access or lack of food access. Next. Again, because we have that double focus on food waste and food insecurity, food recovery also makes the charitable food system more efficient and reduces waste there. So, I actually don't remember where this quote came from, but this came from a food rescue organization that was saying that they have pantries that have too many donations from grocery stores, and they have to find another pantry to take that excess to, right? And so If they don't, that becomes garbage. And without a really robust food recovery network, you find a lot more food ends up in the garbage because of that overage to the food pantry system, which can't handle it. Next. But food recovery organizations, by focusing on bringing equilibrium to that system, by making sure that, if a food pantry goes to pick up at a grocery store and there's too much, or a story that I remember hearing about was I think it was a Salvation Army picking up from Walmart. They had an entire pallet of raspberries. I mean, who needs a pallet of raspberries? You know how quickly they go bad. They need to get to people super fast. And no one organization is going to be able, I shouldn't say no, there are some that can, but most organizations cannot handle a pallet of raspberries very, very quickly. And so food recovery organizations can go in and re-rescue that food and get it out to maybe the 20 organizations that need it to get it out to people quickly. And so, again, it is reducing that waste and that climate impact of the donation system in a traditional model. Next. And then food recovery also makes an impact on nutrition security as well as food security. And of course, nutrition security is something we're starting to talk a lot more about. For years, we've just been talking about food security and food insecurity. But getting back to that idea of social determinants of health, we realize that having enough calories isn't the same thing as having the right calories, the right nutrition. And so nutrition security equals food security plus diet quality, plus equity and access. And food recovery has the opportunity to do that. Next slide, Jake. Right. So again, food banks, because of their nature, that hub and spoke, that serving, a huge population, and this is not a criticism of food banks. I think it's an and situation. We need food banks and food recovery, right? But food banks are the backbone, right? They're making sure that everybody has their month's worth of non-perishable goods and some produce, right? Some perishables, super important. But they can't handle all of that fresh food, and they're not distributing enough fresh food to sustain a family through the month in a lot of cases. Next. Food rescue, though, again, because of its nature, because it's quick turnaround time, you're grabbing that food from the grocery store and you're getting it to where it needs to go, where it's going to get into somebody's hands for dinner. It's all fresh. It's 80 to 90% of it's fresh. It's really good food. It's the food that you need to be healthy, to have that nutrition security. So it's that, so it's increasing that access to food or to nutrition security. Next. So when we put this all together, and I know some of you are looking at this triangle and having thoughts, but I'll get to that in a minute. When we talk about food waste and how to address food waste and food waste solutions, which again is becoming a very prevalent conversation, and I've had multiple conversations in the last couple of weeks with people at the state government level and a few at the federal government level who are thinking about, are just starting to realize that that all food waste solutions are not created equal, because the bottom of this triangle, or I should say this whole triangle, addresses climate change, right? So any food waste solution that keeps food out of the landfill is starting to address the issue of climate change, and therefore your ROI is coming from that, that 165 billion that's costing us in climate impact. Next. But the top of the triangle is what addresses food insecurity, right? So, and that's food rescue. It's getting food to people. And that's important too, because you've also got that upstream impact, right? Those 60 coal-fired power plants. So there, your ROI is looking at climate change plus hunger, the impact of hunger, plus all of those other things we talked about, change in access, nutrition security, et cetera. So when you invest in food recovery, when that's where you put your effort, your time, your money, you're getting that huge impact, that double bang for your buck. That's just a really smart, like any smart investor would look at that and say, oh, well, yeah, that's the obvious place, right? Next. It's so obvious, in fact, that the EPA has changed its food waste scale. As a lot of you know, in the last year, they've gone away from that triangle and they've started to absolutely emphasize that you want to donate your food to people or upcycle it. Those are the preferred solutions because everything else, you lose your value, right? You're losing that upstream impact of having to reproduce that food. You're losing the impact it has on people and on communities and on nutrition access. And so that this solution, food recovery as a solution to climate change and to hunger, its time is coming. People are starting to really recognize that it is the smart place for businesses, for individuals, and for foundations to put their money. And that's the story that we need to be telling. And if you tell that story to your funders, I just think it's a no-brainer. I think it is the best choice for what anybody really could do if they want to tackle even one of these problems. Next. Next. Thought I took that out. Oh, right. So to bring it all together, we started setting the stage. What's the cost of not engaging in food recovery? You close that narrative. What's the impact of scaling food recovery, right? All the benefits that they were expecting from engaging in traditional anti-hunger work or climate work, plus nutrition security, plus increased access, plus the reduction in methane emissions, plus the reduction in costs for climate impact and healthcare, plus any localized benefits that you can sketch out for them because you've done your research and you figured out, what is the specific impact climate change is having in this area? What is the specific neighborhood that is really suffering from the health impacts of food insecurity? And you're painting that picture for them and bringing it all together. All right. With that, oh, again, Karen out sick today. We really miss her. Our next webinar, which we don't have a slide for, is going to be actually really exciting. We're going to be talking about legislation and lobbying and how we can actually move that needle forward. We're going to have a guest speaker. We're going to have Nina Sevilla, who is from the NRDC, and she's also part of the Zero Food Waste Coalition. And she's going to talk about the Farm Bill and what their legislative priorities are, what they'd like to see coming out of the Farm Bill. That's going to be March 21st at 1 p.m. And that will be in the email that you receive in the next couple of days as a follow-up from this webinar.
Jen, we've got a few questions. I'll start from the top. Joseph asked, what is the source for the cost of food insecurity slide? Having mental health cost highest is very interesting to me. I'll go back to that slide. Tell me when I'm there.
I do have the footnote on that. I'm not sure it's on the slide. I might have to, yeah, it's not on the slide. I'll have to send it to you. I have all my sources. I made sure.
Okay.
But there was a study that looked at the impact. And I think if you think about the stress of not having food for your family, it makes sense. That is a very extremely stressful situation. And top that off with the pressure it puts on a family to have somebody with the chronic health issues. You're putting people into the role of caretaker. Yeah, there's a lot there. Yes, EPA does have a brand new food waste scale. That was the sorry, I jumped ahead. That was the last slide that we had with that sort of horseshoe, which I just think is really exciting because it's really starting to recognize that food recovery as a solution stands alone.
Vince asked, how do you identify areas of need?
Yeah, so for that particular study, we took census data. There's a lot of really great data out there available, and actually, they even have the sort of the GIS layers that you can just put right onto your map. I mean, I don't know how to do it, but it's not hard. And you can usually find a student or somebody in that field to help you do that. But we looked at poverty data, we looked at things like food stamps and other benefits. We also included in that study maps of transit access and uh, uh, food access. And we put all of those together and we looked at, so an area that had sort of like rated high on all of those measures, and then low in available, basically charitable food. And so if there was none available within a 15-minute walk shed, that was considered a high need area. And we targeted those when we first did the study in Pittsburgh, we had 13. We targeted those for uh, uh, adding food sources to them.
Someone asked, can you ask for donations from the people who get the food? I don't know if they mean food donations or financial donations. I'll let you
So
answer that.
I'm going to assume you mean the people who receive the food who are eating the food. Um, and for the are you asking, can you ask for financial donations from the people who are receiving the food? Sure, you can. It's legal. You can do whatever you want. It's just a matter of prioritizing where you're going to go after money. I don't think that's the best strategy. That is not a deep pool. And that's already a population that's, under a lot of stress. I think a better source is your volunteers, the people who are picking up the food and distributing it. They're seeing firsthand the impact. They are great sources of financial support, as well as just people in general that are really interested in your mission.
Melissa asked, just curious how most communities structure the funding for their food rescue programs.
I don't think there is a I think that most food rescue organizations are funded by grants, a mix of grants and individual donations, and then possibly some corporate donations. But the lion's share is going to come from foundation grants and individual donations.
Lisa asked, how have you seen organizations address staffing issues given that many pantries rely on volunteers and are short-staffed?
Great question. So, for our food recovery organizations, our Food Rescue Hero food recovery organizations, their volunteer pool is the general public, right? And the nature of volunteering for food recovery is often very different from going to volunteer at a food pantry. You go to a food pantry or food bank, and that is going to be something where you're going and spending a couple hours to volunteer. You're really committing a big part of your day. Food rescue can be done oftentimes in like a half an hour whenever you have the time, or once a week. And the differences between having 10 really committed volunteers who are going to give you 4 hours every Saturday and having 100 volunteers who are going to give you half an hour a couple times a week or a couple times a month. And it's by making that volunteer job much smaller and much easier to fit within a busy person's schedule, the way a lot of people are volunteering these days or are structuring their schedule, means that we can crowdsource. We can have a huge pool of volunteers to do that transportation. And in fact, during the pandemic, one thing we saw that was that our food pantry partners, that a lot of whom were picking up their donations themselves, um, they no longer had the staffing to do that. They were very short on volunteers, and our volunteers took over the transportation of those rescues so they could really focus their volunteer hours where they needed it, which was in the pantry for those distribution days. Yes, food waste prevention you're 100% correct. Food waste prevention is the top choice. Source reduction for sure. I do not see food waste prevention being in competition with waste recovery. There's enormous amounts of food wasted. I saw the SAT, and this one I don't have the statistic for, or the footnote for. It's one that Leia has been using for years, and I picked it off of her, but I'll see if I can find it. Is that we have enough food that we're wasting to end hunger 4 times over on a global scale. 4 times over. We could have food waste at the source through prevention and still have enough to recover food and feed everybody that needs it. It's absolutely not a competition. I think we need to work on this on all fronts.
Somebody said food donations generally have to go to a registered 501(c)(3) for their tax benefits. How can local organizations find and connect with local agencies to arrange food deliveries?
So, first of all, a food recovery organization, if you're a 501(c)(3), then you can be that 501(c)(3. As long as it's eventually getting to a population who needs it, you can be that 501(c)(3). Um, Second of all, looking around and find the organizations that are serving people who are food insecure. And there's a ton of them. Where are people that are, where are people that are low income getting services? There's supportive housing for seniors. There's housing authority sites. And I know I pitch the housing authorities constantly, but they're so great. It's such a great place to take food. It's a concentrated location. Everybody there is already qualified for benefits. They all need food. And there's service coordinators on site to receive and distribute the food. And it's a quick turnaround. It's on dinner table tonight, but there's other places too. We have counties, so we have, well, some of them are supported by the county, some by a local healthcare system, but family support centers for families of children who are in Head Start. We've got a whole series of those around here. We have a nonprofit that serves low-income seniors and provides them with like day programming and things like that. There's veterans programs, job training programs. I mean, there's just a myriad of resources. When you start looking, you'll find more places that are serving the people that need the food that you're trying to serve than you can really shake a stick at.
Lisa asked, would you be willing to discuss the effectiveness of quote feeding the need versus quote shortening the line?
I'm not sure what that means.
Um,
If you can clarify that, Jake, do you?
I don't know what that means either. Lisa, if you could go ahead and either clarify that in the Q&A or in the chat, we could try and answer that. Meanwhile, Alyssa said, I'm curious if your stats are generally referring to a global scale or just the US or North America,
Ooh, Alyssa.
especially for the stat about 60 coal fire plants equaling the amount of emissions for food in the landfill.
Oh, well, I'll tell you where that came from. That was from the USDA, FDA, EPA report that was just released. So I did read the footnoted report it came from, and I can't remember. I'm sorry about that. Uh, but it's in that report. I'm going to guess it's US because it came from 3 US agencies, but it might not be. That was a good question.
Ivy said, I think food recovery and donation contributes to source reduction.
It does, 100%. It does because food waste generators start to see how much food they're wasting, and they start to get a little bit of a better of a handle on it. And you can we provide them with a lot of detailed reports as well that helps them identify, trends and where they're ordering too much or a store that might be a larger generator, and they can make better business decisions. And we've seen some of our donors, the amount of food they're donating has gone down, and that's okay. That's okay. There's still enough food.
Sandra said also, how can we address the food insecurities to areas or populations that may have not, quote, qualified for services, i.e., middle income, that pays for market rate for everything, but missed the cutoff for services?
Well, a lot of those people are actually already accessing certain services. For example, a job training program, library programs, after school programs, things like that. And as long as the majority of the population, or the aim of the program is to serve people who are in need, then it's fine, so to speak, if other people are accessing the food. There's not like that's not like 100% rule. So the other thing that I'll say there is, if the donor, the food donor, like where does it matter, right? Where does that make a difference that you're serving people who need it? It makes a difference if we're talking about tax law, right? And donor liability. So if the donor isn't asking for tax benefits and doesn't care, um, then it doesn't matter. You can serve anybody, right? There's no legal prevention from you rescuing food and giving it to me, as long as the donor's okay with it, right? So you want to find a donor that has some flexibility written into their code, or their thinking, their process. And a lot of local donors will be better suited for that, because they will understand that there are people who need food that may not qualify for benefits, that are sort of outside of that window. I mean, we know anyway that most people that are receiving benefits are working, right? They're working families. It's there's a line, a sort of arbitrary line between who qualifies and who doesn't, and that doesn't mean that somebody that's just over the line isn't struggling. And so I think that you can find donors, especially again, local businesses that are willing to be flexible in who you're giving the food to, so that you can serve people who need it but maybe don't qualify.
Lisa clarified the feeding the need versus shortening the line. It is essentially about systems thinking to get at some of the root causes of food nutrition security. How can food recovery groups work to shorten the line versus just feed the need?
I need to see that where.
It's in the chat.
Okay.
It's essentially about systems thinking to get at some of the root causes of food nutrition insecurity.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. So that is a very good question. I actually had a slide in here that I took out, because the thing about food recovery that it doesn't do is address the root causes of hunger, which is poverty, which is low wages, right? Which is systemic inequality. And it doesn't necessarily address that. Um, and there are ways that it can promote justice and equity. Um, and that's part two of the question. Part one of this is, it takes a long time to make system change, and people need to eat and be fed to get there. And so I don't necessarily feel that it's not promoting equity and justice and system change to make sure people are fed while they fight the good fight. That's the first thing. People got to eat. You got to ameliorate them. I used to work in social change and like long range social change and passing laws and making system change and fighting for like big stuff, but those take a long time, right? But the second thing though is, this food is it's free. It's freely given to us. We give it to organizations, and we don't require anybody to fill out a form, right? We don't require any documentation. We just know this organization is generally serving people who are food insecure, right? From there, that's all we care about. We have faith that the people who take it are people who need it, and that's good enough for us. There's an element of promoting dignity in that sort of access, that you don't have to wait in a line, you don't have to fill out paperwork, you just go get the food where you are. You go to pick up your kids, you get some groceries. That's a very dignified way of receiving food. You go home, there's food in the common room, everybody's getting it. There's no distinction between you and any of your neighbors. It's very dignified. So um, I don't know that that's necessarily promoting big social change, but it is promoting dignity and
Um, Bashir asked, is it perhaps not more efficient to provide monetary donations to food recovery operations to allow them to buy, store, and distribute as required compared to reacting to getting food recovery in ad hoc fashion?
That's a great question. So, first of all, um, that is efficient. And that is the food banking system that you're describing. And that is very efficient. And that's the whole point of the hub and spoke model. And that's why you should give money to food banks, not food, right? They can do more with your dollar than you can do with your dollar. That's really important. There's still food being wasted that is causing climate change, and getting that food to people who need it is an and to the food banking system. It is providing more food to those people, it's providing fresh food to those people, it's providing different types of access to people. Um, and it is also not as ad hoc as you would think, because we have grocery stores that waste food every single day. We know they're wasted every day. They know they waste it every day. We pick it up every day and we take it. So it's very predictable. The exact content of it might not be predictable, but it is pretty predictable. Um, so you can rely on it to some degree, but I agree. It's an and, like I said, it's an and, not an or.
Erica asked, maybe this is in reference to the last question you answered. In that case, how do you collect data?
Uh, so I'm not sure exactly what type of data you're referring to. Um, we actually have a ton of data. We love data. We have a data scientist on staff. With our app, we know what we've rescued, the content of the rescues, the volume, the weight, where it's gone, who received it. Not necessarily that actual person, but the organization that received it. What we don't have is exact demographic data on where it's going. Uh, we do have some demographic data from our partner organizations, but that's a hot mess. I mean, you know this. If you work in food security, every single food security organization is collecting that data just a little bit differently, and so meshing it all together is kind of difficult. But really, the only data I think we're short on is the exact demographics of who's receiving the food, and we can kind of get a pretty good estimate on that.
Ash said making food accessible to all and without access requirements reduces overall stigma around accessing food, so it should be seen as a positive.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
It looks like there are no more questions in the Q&A, so we'll leave it there.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for such great, thoughtful questions and comments and responses. I look forward to reading through the chat. I was not able to look at that while things were going, but I see a lot of really great feedback and response. So really appreciate everybody's presence and contributions here today. And we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Next one's going to be good. We're going to talk about that system change in the next one. Um, Specifically around food recovery, not necessarily about ending hunger, but it'll still be fun. All right. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.